thank you for coming to the talk, and thank you for being in person. We will talk about AI and using AI to go through and do kind of entity recognition. That's kind of what the talk is about. We'll go through all that stuff, but before I actually get into all that stuff, I do want to go through and say thank you to Sands. Thank you to Nico, thank you to Matt, thank you for this in-person opportunity. There's a lot of people you can meet in the OSINT community, and some of them are weirdos, but a lot of them are really good people and very good connections, and I've met some very fun people, and so I do appreciate Sands putting this back on stuff, so yeah. Using open source intelligence and more actually the information gathering portion of that to kind of scale or augment a lot of what we can do for OSINT is very, very helpful. I'll go through a couple different examples. But the stunt part of this, whatever, is trying to go through and get information out of a podcast that I listen to, and I've been listening to it for the last like 5 years, with no real direction. I just wanted to go through and see what it was able to go through and kind of come out with. So you'll see kind of the result of that, the goods and the bads, right? And we'll kind of go through the journey in regards to that stuff. This is me, nobody cares. This is the agenda for the talk. Obviously, I want to go through and give you guys some actionable things that we can go through and do with this information. Understanding why it's important to go through and kind of utilize and augment our pipelines and our data processes for this stuff. Advantages that we can go through and get, and spoiler alert, it's time. You can cut a lot of time out of your operations by using some of this stuff. You still need to go through and get to the important part, which is verification. Trust but verify for a lot of that stuff. And then using practical applications to go through and do this. I'm going to go through and show a couple of proof of concepts, but this is definitely something you can go through and use for closed source information, kind of on your own. If you want to go through and do pre-assessment information for this stuff, anything that you need to go through and do the actual information gathering and data analysis in regards to that stuff. And then we'll go with some kind of takeaways, right? Can you guys see all this stuff? Okay. All right, so ChatGPT is kind of the big one that a lot of people know for, lowest barrier of entry. And it's got a lot of really positive things that it can go through and kind of enumerate on. It's got a vast kind of knowledge set. It's really good at data processing. It's actually getting to the point where you can go through and do Python, and it can process all that information to go through and make sure that it works all the way through, and your data analysis, output visuals and stuff like that, however. They kind of roll that stuff back and forth, but it's really good at languages as well. And one of the things with ChatGPT and some of the other large language model things that you'll kind of see is that there is some information bias. There's a lot of a bias around like the English language and other Romantic languages as opposed to kind of Cyrillic or symbol-based languages. In fact, if you want to go through and do that in ChatGPT, you can, but it's more expensive because it has to go through and kind of decode a lot of that stuff. So there are a lot of positives as well as there are a lot of negatives, right? This is a very burgeoning industry, so there are data limitations. Obviously, context windows and things like that they're putting together are getting larger and larger. Google just came out and said that they had one that can do 1 million tokens, which is great, but again, it's more about what we can actually get out of it, not so much the content, but the quality of that stuff. So you could have 1 billion, million type things, whatever, but if it's not any good, is there any purpose in it, right? There's a lot of potential inaccuracies in regards to some of the stuff. GPTs will go through and put placeholder information in there. A lawyer from, I think, New York found that out when he tried to submit a doc for court and asked GPT to go through and write his discoveries. It did, but it put placeholder information in there, and those cases were not actually live or real, so that was fun. Validate your sources, obviously, in regards to that stuff. Also, the ethical and the privacy concerns. Aside from just people being able to go through and use your queries, your prompts as training data, which, some people say they won't, some people say they will. I never trust corporations in regards to, not using my data. They'll just say they anonymize it and then they go from there. There are liabilities that have been discovered in regards to large language models, these AIs and things like that, like prompt engineering and injections. There are ways to go through and make the large language model, the GPTs, go through and spit out consumer information on these platforms. So there's a lot of things that we can do to limit our privacy, our OPSEC, things like that, however, that we should know about prior to engagement, right? What we do before actually matters, even in large language models and pre-assessment. Anything we go through and set up for our scope, for our question, what we're trying to get to. This is a very common slide that I put on everything because it's so important, right? You can walk into any situation, but like Matt said just before, you can't do OPSEC retrospectively. Like, you can't go backwards. It's what you do before that matters in regards to our investigations, right? So what goals are we researching? What's our scope creep in regards to this stuff? Are we using publicly available information? Are we using closed source? Are we using paid tools? What are we actually trying to get to in regards to our investigation? Setting that stuff out will really help you define down your scope and stuff, right? We want to go through and produce information that's actionable for our stakeholders and our clients, but we can only do that if we know what the question is that we're trying to go through and tackle. So what you do before will really kind of judge what you do and what you don't do. And hopefully I can give you some examples in regards to some of the tool sets that we can go through and use, and then you guys can go through and kind of marry them with your either operational security or your needs in regards to this stuff, right? So let's get into the big one. This is the lowest barrier of entry. This is ChatGPT and OpenAI. And just as a kind of a spoiler or whatever, I am not a good coder. I shouldn't even say coder, it's programmer, right? I know how to read Python. I can do some other stuff. I'm very dangerous, but the amount of time it takes me to go through and actually write scripts is laughable. So I always have to work with other people, or I can actually go through and actually work with ChatGPT, right? So this is an accelerator. This is something that augments my workflows and allows me to go through and work a little bit faster in regards to this stuff. And this isn't the only example. You can do data analysis, work, web scraping, other things like this. But I had a problem like 2 months ago, whatever. I had a bunch of dumps in regards to HTML files, and I said, hey, convert this all into plain text. Pull off the relevant information that I want to go through and see, which is emails, phone numbers, links, all that other stuff, whatever. And it said, sure. And so it put out this script. And it worked really well. And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of fun. Let's iterate on this process. Don't you love my 90s style pop-ups with this stuff? So I was saying, okay, well, I don't want to use third-party browser tools anymore. I want to go through and scrape this stuff myself. So send me a request to go through and do fetches to go through and grab the HTML so that I can go through and parse it locally. And it said, yeah, no problem. Here you go. I was like, awesome. This is actually working. Like I can hit run. It does the script, and then it actually outputs and not just gives me a syntax error, where I stop and throw stuff around. So then I'm saying, okay, well, I want to go through and be able to go through and look at this stuff, pull all the information out, but just scrape the hrefs. I just want the links in regards to this stuff. And it said, yeah, no problem. I can do that as well. If you use ChatGPT for nothing else, use it for regular expressions. You'll never have to use another regex calculator again. You can actually just put it in here, and it will tell you exactly what to do. That way you don't have to go through and mess with putting the period or the B or wherever, kind of goes with that stuff. So I said, okay, I don't want to go through and search all this stuff manually. I want to go through and see what the live links are. So can you go through and write me a script that does return a 200 server code so that I know that the link is live before I spend a lot of time diving into it and start researching it? I said, yeah, sure. Here you go. So I was like, this is awesome. Like this was like maybe 7 minutes of me iterating in the browser and outputting 4 different scripts. And I was like, okay, well, 4 different scripts is kind of a pain in the ass, right? So I was saying, is there a way to go through and actually make this into a pipeline? Can I go through and mature this process as intelligent programmers would, not me? I said, is there a way to go through and make this actually work to my benefit and actually get this all kind of together in one script? And it says, yeah. You can go through and just chain everything and put together. And I know a lot of my programmer friends and other people I worked on teams are like grabbing their head and shaking violently because it's modules. So they taught me about modules before, whatever, but this actually goes through and just puts all the stuff together so that I can actually have this as a data platform, right? So you went from no information to a full output of all this stuff. So it's pretty impressive, right? That's just one example of kind of ChatGPT. And again, this is the lowest barrier of entry because there's some people who don't want to go through and do code. Totally understand that. Code is scary. Computers are bad. But also, from some of your SOPs, you can't go through and run code on the command line. And I totally understand that as well. There's some other things you can go through and do with some of the other examples we'll kind of get into. But this is really augmenting and making it so where if you want to go through and do a single-use code, or if there's a function that you need to go through and try to get to, it's really good about doing that one thing. That is kind of the caveat, though, right? Large language models that are built kind of on top of these artificial intelligence and stuff like that, they are super, super good about doing one thing. They're very linear. Now you can iterate on that. You can go through and continue to ask it questions. It's not working. I want to go through and do this, make it this color, do whatever you want to go through and do. But it's really only available in regards to that one item right now. You know, AGI, all that stuff. We'll talk about that later. But one thing that we can go through and do and what we want to look forward to is using open source, you know, locally sourced, or not locally sourced, not farm to table, locally sourced large language models that we can go through and download and that we can use on our own machines or virtual machines or wherever, so that we don't have to go through and do these connections to OpenAI API or in these other ones, and it reduces the cost in regards to the stuff as well. So I just wanted to touch on this before we get into the other topics. This is LM Studio. LM Studio is based out of Brooklyn, so if you have American-centric ops that you need to go through and do, this does it. This does everything, essentially, that ChatGPT does. So it does go through and actually allow you to go through and download the different models, right? It'll download it in the correct configuration, which is super nice because you don't want it to go through and do quantization and bits and bytes and all this other stuff, whatever. So it'll download it from a site called Hugging Face that we'll get to. But you can actually just load the model, and you can actually just interact with it as a chat window like you would with ChatGPT. And it's all local. There's no internet connection needed. You can go through and unplug your computer and you can talk to it all day long, right? The really nice thing about LM Studio is that it also acts as an inference server. So basically what it will do is it will go through and host your LLM on a port that you decide. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And you can call it as like an API object. So if you have code or another application and you don't want to go through and send it out to OpenAI, you can actually go through and do it with this local large language model. Say that 7 times fast. The really nice part is that a lot of these models are, are created for specific purposes. This one that we were looking at a little bit before here, go back, this White Rabbit Neo, this is specifically trained on cybersecurity data. This is one of those models that we were talking, Chris was talking earlier about dark web models and stuff like that, like Worm GPT and some of the other ones, Fraud GPT. This one is the same, but it has its boundaries. It will write anything you ask it, but at the same time, it's meant to go through and be a defensive type of LLM for that stuff. So that is something to know. But this will become important later. I just want to go through and show this because this is something you can actually go through and put on your laptop right now and start interacting with it. So it's very actionable, right? AutoGen. This is kind of one of the other parts of the talk we want to get into. This is a product by Microsoft. It is not the main focus because this is command line driven. And I know code is scary, computer's bad. So AutoGen is a really neat product though, because what it does is it says we identify that these large language models can only go through and do one thing at a time, but they do it really well. We can iterate, we can go through and assign it tasks. So what we want to do is create like a group chat, right, with all these different AI agents, and then we can go through and give it backstory, mission parameters. We can go through and tell it what we need to go through and do, and it still can only go through and do that one thing. Like you can see up the example here for like student wants to go through and talk to the expert. So student goes to the assistant goes to the expert, and then outputs from there, right? So it's really interesting because when it first came out, there was only 2 agents it was allowed to go through and have in these group chats. Now you can have as many as you want, like up to 6, depending upon your hardware setup and stuff like that. So it's really impressive because you can actually go through and have it as a manager, as a scientist, as a critic, so you can have it rebut or rebut type things, whatever, make it go back and do the research again, reprove it. You can have it as a coding assistant. You can play D&D with this, right? So I know that's the number one thing we all want to do, but it's very, very interesting, and it really works very well for this stuff, but high barrier to entry, right? This is code. You don't want to go through and do this in your command line because, you know, why, right? So they came out with something called AutoGen Studios, which is going to be kind of the main focus of what we kind of talk about, and here's going to be towards the end of the talk and stuff, right? AutoGen Studio is a graphical user interface, or UI, UX, or whatever you say now, whatever, for going through and doing that stuff. So this is your homepage. Again, this is also served on a local port on your machine. This isn't hosted in the cloud or anything. And it allows you to go through and have this graphical user interface where you can actually go through and build specific pipelines, agents, skills, and give this to them so that they can go through and create, you know, or solve whatever task you're looking to go through and do. So you can see it has Playground up here. Playground is where you kind of institute all the sessions. The sessions allow you to go through and run the code. If you really like it, it will go through and you can save it in the gallery so that you can go through and either reuse certain agents or code or something else like that. But the really important bit is where we get into kind of the build phases. Oh, sorry. This is actually it running in the background. I just wanted to just show you that it wasn't just magic in a box somewhere, right? This is actually running on Anaconda. I've actually had it working relatively well in Anaconda and other Python virtual environments. I've also run it on my bare metal machines and stuff. It works pretty well. It's very robust, and it has a lot of benefits. Also, it understands what environment it's in, which is kind of scary, but it's very beneficial for it to know that type of stuff. So when we look at creating these type of agent skills, workflows, things like that, however, you can kind of see up here where the breakout is. And again, this is all templated, right? You don't have to go through and worry about putting the comma at the end or making sure your indent is correct and all this stuff. This is super plug and play for a lot of different reasons. You can create these different agents and you give them their backstory. You know, what are they good at? You can give them their mission operation. You know, what are you trying to do? And then you can go through and give them skills. And the skills are literally things that you can go through and write in Python or Go, JavaScript, whatever it is. You can actually give them OSINT tools and say, hey, you're an OSINT expert. You know how to go through and do this and this. You want to use the harvester? Go for it, right? Whatever they're going to go through and decide to accomplish the actual prompt is what they're going to go through and take. The interesting thing is if you give them no skills whatsoever, and you do allow them to go through and write Python code, they will still write Python code, and they will execute it. So even if you don't set them up with skills, they're robust enough to know that they need to go through and build a web scraper, or that they need to go through and do some sort of authentication to an API. Now, they may not have the API, but they know they need to get there. So it's pretty interesting. The skills, again, you can have them go through and write the skills, right? You can automate the process in regards to Python and stuff like that, however, or you can actually go through and put in GitHub scripts, and they can actually utilize a lot of the stuff here. Workflows, like I said, this is where you kind of design the group chat. So you can go through and put a bunch of different AI agents together. You can go through and give them all different skills. And you can go through and say, inside of this workflow, you know, your overall objective is this. So you can add even more fidelity in regards to this. So the agent itself understands what it needs to do. The workflow, if there's ever a decision or a question about how it should proceed, what is its scope, it can refer back to that fidelity in regards to the workflow specifically, right? Last thing is you can assign models. This is super, you know, it's boring, but it's kind of fun at the same time. You can actually go through and use the OpenAI API to start if you wanted to. But then for other agents, you can actually, like I said, you can use that local open source large language model. You see the third one, there's the bloke, Zephyr 7B. That actually allows you to go through and set up that inference server and only use it on certain models, or all the models, or none of the models, right? You have the ability to go through and kind of play with that stuff there. So it's pretty powerful in regards to what you can try to get out of it. Now again, local language models, or this can be the large language models that are open source, they're good-ish. You know, they're not great in regards to the OpenAI, which is trained on 170, or what is it, 300-something trillion different parameters there. These are like 7 billion, 13 billion, and 70 billion. So you can see there's still a delta in regards to the understanding of whatever the mixture of experts model is kind of put together for that stuff. But for OSINT researchers, for people who are concerned about privacy, if we can go through and train a model and we can use it and it's all offline and we can put closed source information in there, non-public information, this is definitely something we can go through and utilize on our own internal research structures, right? So let's ask it to do some stuff, because that's what we want to do. We want to go get a coffee. Let's make it do some stuff, right? I'm from Kansas City. I'm very proud about being from Kansas City, but that's okay, another thing. I wanted it to inform me about some stuff that happened, I think this was late January. There was a ransomware group called Medusa that took over The KCATA, which is the transit authority, shut down all the buses, not because the buses were hooked, but because no one could pay. So that's why we're shutting stuff down now. And I said, hey, I want you to go through and give me some information about a recent ransomware attack. Now, preface this with OpenAI, their knowledge cutoff is April of 2023, right? So last year. So this is not intrinsic knowledge that they understand about this attack, right? So I'm asking it to go through and use KCATA, which is an acronym, so it has to go through and figure that out. And then I want it to go through and look at recent events, which means it has to go to the web. So it understands that. So we're going to build a web scraper. We're going to search for the relevant information. And if we have any relevant images, we're going to go through and do that. We're going to put it up there. It failed on the images because there wasn't really anything else that it could do. But the really interesting thing was what happened afterwards. After it started running, it said, okay, hey, we tried to go through and use Selenium, which God only knows why it wanted to go jump straight to Selenium and headless browsing to go through and do a web scraper, but good on it, right? And it said, we can't do it, we can't install the drivers because we're on a Windows box. Cringe, I know. But then it said, we're going to default to requests and beautiful soup. Great, get after it, right? I'm going to go get another coffee. So it was doing that, and then it actually did produce pretty good results. All this code up here is one-shot code. It created all that. It wrote all of that stuff down there. And then there's a couple different reference points for the articles that it did produce. What was interesting was it did produce 27 different articles from the web scrape. There was no duplicates, which was super, super nice. And it did get local sources like KCTV5, which is local for Kansas City. And then it got more national, more internet-based like Security Affairs. And it always mentioned, or I shouldn't say always, it mentioned specifically about the ransomware event in every single one. Of the 27, 21 of them were specific about the event. So 77%, not great, not bad, but this was a one-shot, right? I just gave it some basic information, said set this up and go to work. I didn't give it any other real guidelines. I didn't give it any other specific search URLs. Nothing else, however, was directed by me. So that was kind of impressive. So let's make it do some more stuff, right? So this is where we're going to get into the podcast I was talking about. There's a podcast called Freedom. It's been going on for the last 5 years. It's a comedy podcast. It's also in a very large network called Earwolf. They actually do another podcast called Comedy Bang Bang, which has been going on for 14 years. Fans of both of them, whatever, but I knew enough about the source material that I could ask it to go through and start producing information, and so I could test against known knowledge. That way, if there was false positives, or was anything else, whatever, I could immediately kind of see that. And I said I really wanted it to go through and produce the information, but then put it into a visual format and I didn't tell it to go through and do entity recognition, but what I wanted it to do was entity recognition. I wanted it to go through and find the information, links for the people, and start producing that as a graph so that I could go through and look at this and, understand it implicitly and kind of move forward with that stuff, right? So this was the graphic agent that I made. And like I said, I just wanted to show this as kind of a template example. This is what you get in AutoGen Studios. It will say, what's the agent name? What's the descriptor? How many different times do you want it to go through and reply inside this conversation? So again, if you're using OpenAI, you might want to limit this down because each call costs money, all that stuff, right? And then it gives us a system message. It tells them, what its background is, but what its current mission statement is for that stuff as well. So that was kind of fun. So this is the prompt that I gave it, right? This is all the information that I gave it at the beginning. I said, hey, look for the podcast Freedom. Use whatever code you need to go through and accomplish the goal. I'm looking for the podcast and the hosts. Get the titles, the connections of the host, and use Wikipedia as a backstop, right? If you want to go through and actually validate this information, use Wikipedia because it's an open source kind of library. I should have used IMDb, but I didn't think about that. Wikipedia is good enough to go through and get started in regards to this stuff. Also, it's janky enough that if there are failures, I'll be able to go through and kind of see that stuff, right? So it's kind of fun. So, so this is where it failed upwards, right? It said, you know what? We actually did some research. We found out there's 3 hosts, and we made you a graph about it. And I said, that's correct? Okay, that you're failing forwards. Great, okay. 3 different hosts, and it made a pie chart of that. Okay, works. And it said, oh, we're not done. We're not done. We found out that Earwolf has a bunch of different podcasts, and this is one of them. And I said, the hell? Okay, so good, you know what one is. But because I was asking it to go through and gather information and needed to express it visually, this is how it kind of output this stuff with no other suggestions, right? So I said, okay, well, let's go through and iterate through this, right? Let's actually see if there's some additional information that we can go through and get in regards to a different visualization style, more of the host's kind of connected tissue. We'll go into maybe celebrities, not high-value targets. We're going to look at different shows that maybe they're also involved with, right? And so I gave it this information, it starts thinking, and it starts doing some more stuff. And this is the first thing it kind of came back out with. And this is not bad. This is not great, but this is me giving it no directive to go through and search where it needs to go through and do. It's doing all of the automation itself, whatever, and scraping. And it's actually pretty understandable because from the Scott Aukerman on the side over there, he's connected to Comedy Bang Bang. Comedy Bang Bang is a much larger data source on the internet because it's been around for a long time. There's multiple different people who have been on it. It's kind of fun. But it's interesting because then it goes into the connection between Earwolf and then another show that is on, I think it's YouTube, whatever. It's comedy. It's Between Two Ferns with Zach Galifianakis. So that was kind of interesting to see that it did that. So I said, okay, let's do more. Let's improve on this, right? So then it actually goes through and starts breaking out some of the different hosts, some of the different information. It starts categorizing it by produced by or giving text links in regards to how these are all connected. This is doing more and more what I wanted, which was the entity recognition stuff. I said, this is great. I said, okay, well, you're still missing some podcasts from like Paul F. Tompkins and Lauren Lapkus. You haven't touched them. I said, also overlay the business on it. Who owns this? You know, let's find out some basic information about the business structure. It's pretty good. It color-coded it. It came up with some of the original like band leaders for some of the stuff. It did go through and start pulling some of the other information for the other hosts. You can see SiriusXM actually owns Earwolf and just acquired Stitcher. That's why everyone sees all those Stitcher premium ads now for everything. It's like NordVPN all over, right? But it does go through and show you like who are the more high-level knowledge or known entities, whatever, in regards to guests and things like that, right? So there's a million things we could do with this. And this is just a proof of concept because I wanted to go through and use an understood kind of public-facing, something that's very open to everybody else, whatever. But if you wanted to go through and do this with business, if you wanted to do this with connections in regards to military organizations, if you wanted to go through and do this with closed source information, this is definitely something where you can go through, best part about this, it took me half an hour. 30 minutes from start to finish. I am not a good programmer. I would do this work because I get stuff done, but each one of those boxes, put a box here, put a box here, put a this, do this, that would have been 5 hours, right? But this was done in 30 minutes, and I could iterate over it every single time to go through and kind of make it better. So again, big spoiler alert is it's a huge augmentation and time saver for a lot of this stuff here. So it, like I said, this is as a proof of concept, using this as entity recognition, and you can get even fancier with this, using like Spacey, using, NKTL for natural language programming and sorting for entity recognition. There's a lot of other things we could play with in regards to this stuff. Even doing this as an open source large language model that you can go through and do on your own PC or on your own virtual machine, you can go through and have this with no internet connection whatsoever, write Python scripts for days, and if you have a closed data set that you want to go through and bounce this against, this is something that will definitely go through and accelerate the information gathering side of open source intelligence, right? It gets us faster to the verification point where we need to go through and actually sit down, make sure there's no false positives, make sure that what it's actually outputting is correct, and then we can actually go through and summarize this, formalize this, bottom line up front for whoever our client is, and then move on with our next project, right? So this is kind of wrapping up here. I've got about 5 minutes. These are some of the other projects that I want to go through and key you in on. If you've been living under a rock, and who wouldn't, because news, right? And you didn't know anything about OpenAI, or you didn't know anything about large language models, this is just some other good stuff to go through and be aware of. Half an hour is not long enough to go through and talk about this, but Matt held a gun to my head, so I had to, kind of fit this all in here. So, if you're going to go with ChatGPT, which is totally fine, I've got an account there. Just be aware the API is a separate cost, so it's pay per use, and then you can do your subscription for ChatGPT. Right? It's very effective. I really like it. This GPTs is allowing you to go through and create your own individual one-time or one use case, I should say, assistance. Right? It's very good at that one thing. You can add data. You can go through and do whatever you want. You can give your mission statements, all that stuff there. Right? So GPTs, pretty good. Cloud is another competitor in regards to the OpenAI, or the AI space, whatever. They're backed by AWS, so they are definitely a competitor directly with OpenAI, right? Good stuff. They're a little bit cheaper. The output's not bad, it's not good, it's just different, right? This is what I was talking about with Hugging Face. HuggingFace.io is essentially GitHub for the AI community. It's really nice because you can go through and pull down models. You can go through and ask questions. There's community files. A lot of this stuff here as well you can go through and interact with because they are running local inference servers on this site. So if you want to go through and do a text-to-image, you can just do it here. So it's nice because it's like third party. It's like set it and forget it, right? If I break it, it's on their machine. I don't care, right? So this is something that if you are serious about looking into this a little bit more, at least create an account because it's very beneficial. Chris talked about private GPT, which private GPT is very good. This is another project called GPT for All, and I think they are on version 3 or something now. This is really good because it does also give you the opportunity to download models and interact with it in regards to like a chatbot type thing. It does not create an inference server, but what it does is it allows you to go through and upload documents, much like private GPT, where you can go through and interrogate all those documents in a closed source session. So no internet connection, you can turn it off, all that stuff. Everything's secure and private. This is obviously a very serious project. This is kind of a fun one. If you are using Mac as command line or you're using Linux as command line, Shell GPT, well, it does cost money because you have to go through and put the API key in there, the OpenAI API key, sorry. But it will go through and actually write out bash commands for what you want to go through and do. So as an example, if you're in Kali, right? If you're in a Kali box and you want to go through and say, oh, I want to use the harvester, great. But I want to use the harvester and I want to pull down the data, I want to deduplicate it, I want to sort it, I want to prettify it, and then I want to go through and output it. Yeah, no problem. It will give you the one bash script to go through and do all that stuff. And then it'll say, do you want to execute this? Like it will run the code for you because it's just created the prompt. And then you can either go through and say, no, I can abort it, or I want to save it. So if you want to go through and learn a little bit more about command line, this is a really, really cool tool. If you don't want to learn about command line, like I do, and you just want to use aliases, this is a really cool tool to go through and to kind of automate your pipelines and all that stuff, right? The last thing that I will kind of talk about is there's a gentleman named Daniel Messner. I'm really bad at his name, but he just came out with a project called Fabric, and it is using AI to augment and to pull specific patterns for stuff. It is another good one. I'll link it in my GitHub. So to get to the end of it, however, this is the same that everyone else has kind of been talking about this entire summit. The use of the analyst is actually more important now than it's ever been. One of the reasons why is because there's going to be a lot of people that are going to take information dumps from AI or from, sourced web scraping from AIs and stuff like that. They're not going to do any validation on this. There's no verification. They're just going to push it and say, that's the word. So as defenders kind of the internet, as places where we need to go through and kind of validate and verify, as we need to go through and make sure that disinformation doesn't go rampant in regards to this stuff, we can actually use a lot of these pipelines to go through and help with that stuff. There are tools coming to go through and identify AI-generated materials, but that is something that a lot of people should be more concerned about with that stuff. So that's kind of my talk. If you have any questions, I've got about 29 seconds left. Also my GitHub if you want to go through and check that. And then that's me outside of here, right? I'm just kidding. Thank you so much.